The rain began before dawn, a soft salt-tinged drizzle sweeping inland from Blackwater Bay and stitching the banners on AEGON's encampment with threads of silver. In the half-light, campfires guttered, casting wavering shadows across the slopes of Aegon's Hill, where 6,000 of the Conqueror's spearmen and archers huddled beneath oiled cloaks. They murmured to one another in hushed Valyrian, their words rippling like dark water around the black-red standard that crowned the command ridge. Above that tri-headed dragon, Valyrian the Black Dread stretched and stamped restlessly, each slow beat of his wings displacing curtains of mist that drifted down a slope to mingle with the waking city. King's Landing, though no king had ever yet ruled from its walls, lay sprawled below, far larger than Aegon recalled from that first muddy encampment 3 centuries past. Then it had been a scatter of timber palisades and hastily raised tents, now a metropolis of pale stone towers and paved avenues swept north and west in glittering grids. Sleek, black roads, carved from fused stone no mason of Valyria had ever mastered, radiated from the Red Keep's crimson precipice. Strange glass lenses crowned the highest battlements, tracking the sky with unblinking eyes. On the harbor, sleek gray warships with slanted prows dozed at anchor, their sides bristling with bronze-nosed tubes that reminded Aegon of Myrish organ pipes. Yet he had seen those iron mouths spit thunder across the water in a skirmish off Driftmark 2 nights ago. Whole decks of Velaryon dramans had simply vanished beneath white blossoms of fire. It was a different Westeros he faced, a realm ripened by centuries Aegon had never lived. The maesters spoke of shattered timelines and folded ages, yet such riddles mattered less to him than the steel-willed soldiers arrayed beyond the river. They called themselves the Unified Crown Host, and their numbers dwarfed anything fielded in the old wars of conquest. 50,000 foot in uniforms, dyed a deep storm gray, stood behind earthworks reinforced with iron frames. Artillery batteries, he knew the word now, loomed like squat, angular statues, their barrels draped in tarps awaiting the stroke of day. Farther back, sleek armored wagons, tanks, the maesters named them, rumbled between makeshift depots, while above it all floated pale oblong balloons tethered to unseen lines, bearing baskets filled with observers and glinting glass. Ravens on strings, Aegon's sister Rhaenys had joked, though none laughed long when the first explosive shells whistled down from those silent eyes. The Conqueror inhaled, savoring the cold bite of rain, and ran a gauntleted thumb along the ridged hilt of Blackfire. It hummed with a sour, eager warmth. Aegon Targaryen had mastered half a continent with 7,000 swords and 3 dragons. He would not yield the world to any host, modern or otherwise. Yet prudence, always his ally, demanded more than fire and pride. He had spent the last fortnight scouting, probing, testing the edges of this new crown host, where once lords charged behind gleaming lances, now disciplined ranks marched to the bark of whistles, while distant cannon spit iron hurtling faster than crossbow bolts. Even Balerion bore scars along his onyx scales, bright silver lines where some explosive had seared molten tracks before the dragon's fires cauterized flesh to stone. The Black Dread was not invincible, only vast. A flicker of wings at his shoulder announced Vagar's landing. Visenya slid from her mount, plumes of steam rising as rain hissed against Vagar's copper hide. Her silver-gold hair was bound tight, her expression iron. Without greeting, she strode to the wardable, a broad slab of black marble hauled from Dragonstone and etched overnight with chalk marks denoting trenches, artillery nests, and the peculiar fences of wire that sliced no man's blade yet left soldiers screaming and convulsing when struck by their invisible bite. Rhaenys arrived moments later, long crimson cloak clinging to her damp mail. Meraxes rumbled behind, tail lashing muddy furrows down the slope. Their patrols have withdrawn across the rush, Rhaenys said. They're daring us to strike at daylight. Aegon nodded. They believe their thunder tubes will break dragon and man alike before we close the ground. Perhaps they will, Visenya murmured, but they have never met 3 dragons at once. She traced a chalked semicircle, the upstream ford where the rush narrowed before meeting the bay. If we sweep north and descend in enfilade, Rhaenys raised a gloved hand. They're ready for that flank. I saw stakes crowned with bright globes, glass, but filled with some alchemist's light. When struck, they burst into clouds that cling and burn. The memory shivered in her voice. She had tested one globe upon an empty field west of Rosby, and watched grasslands seethe with emerald fire until black rain quenched it hours later. Aegon exhaled slow, letting the clamor of distant drums fill the pause. The unified host struck him as Hofmeister, Hofmaschine, precision, repetition, a music of gears. Yet all machines were forged by mortal hands, and mortal men still woke each dawn weighing fear against duty. The dragon stirs fear deeper than any contrivance. He turned to the sisters. We will not fly north or south. We strike the center, where their guns cluster thickest. Break the spine quickly, and the limbs will follow. Visenya's eyes gleamed like tempered steel. A spear point of flame. Precisely. He shifted a silver token 3 inches forward across the map, pinning it atop a block inked in Crown Host Gray. Balerion descends first, vertical near the river. Their guns will elevate too late. While they adjust, Vhagar sweeps the bastion line to the left. Meraxes takes the right, severing their command carts and balloons. On foot, our shield wall advances behind the Dragonfall, Orais leading, clearing trenches and securing the riverbank. Now, Naina, Rhaenys hesitated. Your foot will suffer under their machine guns. Heavy shields, split ash and steel. They advance only after the first pass. If we do not shatter their batteries, our shields will be coffins regardless. The Wardable held its breath. Outside, thunder murmured over the bay. Not skyborne, but the deep echo of engines revving on the far shore, columns repositioning. The hour approached. Aegon lifted his gaze and saw in the dragon's immense eyes a reflection of ancient Valyria's forgeglow, the promise of absolute dominion. Yet beyond that glow flickered something he had never known in the wars of the 7 kingdoms. Uncertainty, the whisper that perhaps here, at last, Dragonfire met its match. He kissed Visenya's brow, then Rhaenys. For House Targaryen, he murmured. Black fire slid free in a whisper of Valyrian harmony. Balerion bent a serpentine neck so Aegon could mount. The king settled into the saddle, rain needling his cheeks, and wrapped fingers around the spines jutting from the dragon's ridge. Muscles like shifting mountains flexed beneath him. A single beat of vast wings sent tents flapping and men ducking. Dracarys, Aegon breathed. Not a command, but a promise. And the black dread rose into the wet gray heavens. Below, horns brayed from the crown host's lines, thin brazen cries swallowed by the growl of engines. Spotlight snapped on, carving white bars through the drizzle. Somewhere a siren wailed, high and shrill. In that piercing ululation, Aegon sensed dread coiled tight as any bowstring. Good. Fear was the crack that let fire pour in. Balerion angled his descent, wings folding until the air howled along scale and sinew. The world narrowed to the shining strip of river, and the ragged teeth of cannon muzzles, jutting toward the sky. Smoke blossomed as the first shells climbed, slow molasses balls that seemed harmless, until they burst below, scattering jagged shrapnel that rang against Balerion's breastplate of ancient bone. Aegon leaned low against the warm black scales, murmuring, and the dragon answered with a rumble that rattled even the king's teeth. Flame gathered behind obsidian fangs, heat deeper than forges, brighter than noon. Then the black dread exhaled. Fire like molten suns poured downward. Trenches vanished in an instant of white gold fury. Earth turned to glass, men to shadows, etched upon walls that themselves dissolved. Gun barrels sagged, screaming, collapsing in bubbling knots. A gust of superheated wind slammed across the river, flattening pennants and hurling soldiers backwards like dolls. But the unified host had planned for dragons. Even as the first bastion melted, secondary batteries pivoted on mechanized mounts, spitting spears of steel encased in alchemical ice. The projectiles splashed against Balerian's wings, unleashing jets of freezing vapor that crystallized rain mid-fall. Where the frost clung, dragon fire dimmed to red coals. Balerion roared, angling away into that chaos of Vagar. Visenya's laughter sharp beneath the thunder. She banked left, clearing the flank with sheets of orange that ignited stores of powder. The blast rose taller than the city walls. Meraxes mirrored rightward, jaws dropping open to hurl violet flame upon the command convoy. Engines erupted, and a balloon overhead burst into shards of silk, raining burning cordage. Yet the defenders endured. Out of the shattered first line rolled armored hulks, turrets swiveling as they advanced even through cascading debris. Their guns barked bright tongues that spat nickel-jacketed slugs. Where those bullets struck, they punched neat holes through dragon wing membranes, feathering the sky with black blood. Meraxes staggered, one wing stuttering. Aegon felt Rhaenys' answering cry of pain through the flame and smoke. Still, the spear point held. Oris Baratheon, half-brother and hammer, led the infantry across the rush under cover of dragon wrath. Heavy shields, double-layer oak faced with beaten iron, locked and lifted in tortoise. Gunfire rattled down like hail, but the formation trudged on, boots churning river mud. Behind them, archers knocked fireglass arrows made in the forges of dragonstone, slender cylinders filled with wildfire that burst on impact into pools of green doom. Arcs of emerald fell among the trenches yet unbroken, buying precious strides. Above, Balerion wheeled for a second pass. Ice glances clung to his wings, draining heat. Aegon closed his eyes, felt the old Valyrian words ignite in his marrow, and spoke them on a single breath. Ash-gray light shimmered across the dragon, scales brightening as crimson veins of molten core birthed fresh fury. The frost evaporated in a hiss of steam. With a bellow that split clouds, Balerion dove again, this time aiming not for earth, but sky. High overhead, rows of tiny silver darts hung in rigid patterns, the winged machines called aeroplanes. They had not dared descend during the first strike, content to circle like falcons awaiting weakness. Now they plunged, guns flashing. Tracers stitched the air in glowing arcs, seeking dragon flesh. Balerion met them, head-on. The world filled with noise, a choir of manic hammers. Aegon tasted iron as a slug grazed his pauldron, yet for every flash of their fire, the dragon's maw blazed brighter. One aeroplane caught the full torrent. Metal melted mid-air, transforming instantly from sleek predator to cascading slag that fell in smoking petals upon the men below. The rest banked away, engines screaming. Time blurred into sequences of fire and steel. Visenya's Vagar swept low enough for claws to rake trenches, scattering limbs and soil in fountains. Rhaenys guided Meraxes toward the harbor, immolating the moored warships whose cannons still rumbled across the water. Pillars of smoke coiled into the rain clouds, a black crown above the stricken city. Yet this modern host refused collapse. From bunkers unseen beneath layers of reinforced concrete, new batteries rose on hydraulic arms, their barrels lined with shimmering blue crystal. They hissed rather than boomed, projecting spears of pulsing cobalt energy. Where those lances struck Dragonhide, Scales popped like shattered obsidian, exposing raw muscle. Meraxes reeled, wailing, one leg trailing limp. Rhaenys fought to steady her. Aegon wheeled Balerion east, seeking to cut those guns before they could bring down a dragon. But the air shuddered. From some distant tower, a beam of light, a pure, searing rod, flashed between cloud and earth, lancing through Vhagar's left wing. The membrane dissolved, a red mist. Visenya's cry echoed across the valley as her mount wobbled, bleeding smoke. Ba could not fall. The old dragon clawed skyward on raw will, but she could no longer bank. A cold fist tightened around Aegon's heart. The crown host's mages, if such they were, had harnessed powers rivaling alchemy and sorcery both. Dragons would not prevail by brute fury alone. Strategy must bend. He signaled Balerion into ascent, rising above the storm. There the rain thinned to icy drizzle, and clear air opened. The city spread in jagged geometry below, aflame in scarlet and emerald, yet its heart still beat. Columns of reserves surged along wide avenues toward the riverfront, their armor reflecting the inferno. Far to the southwest, the Grand Sept shattered. Dome glowed where something volatile burned within, turning marble red as hellfire. Aegon considered, if he smashed the Red Keep, now a citadel of glass and steel, they might break the defender's spirit. Yet it lay deep within gridworks of Antiquaire towers. Instead, his gaze settled on the colossal reservoirs perched atop Visenya's hill, glistening black cisterns feeding the city's water and power lines. Destroy them, and the crown host's machines would choke on ash. Its wounded go uncooled, its lines falter. He banked, diving in a silent glide broken only by wind whistle. Balerion's immense body cut the air like a falling mountain. Artillery tracked them, too slow. The dragon opened jaws, but not to breathe flame. Instead, he bit hard upon the nearest cistern. Iron crumpled like parchment. Millions of gallons burst forth, a tidal wave cascading through streets, sweeping wagons, guns, and men into swirling maelstrom. Electrical lines snapped, dancing with white sparks that kissed spilled oil fires into new life. A second cistern fell to claws, a third ruptured beneath tailswipe. Below, lights flickered across the crown host's lines, power grids sputtering. The luminous energy guns dimmed. Antiquaire towers died mid-beam, blackening. Visenya's embattled Vhagar caught a friendly updraft towards safety. Rhaenys steered Meraxes to strafe yet another depot now undefended, kindling a new roar of explosions. On the riverbank, Orys Baratheon drove the spearhead home. Heavy shields parted near the crest, and armored shock troops bore massive steel hammers wrapped in runes of old Valyria font. They struck the weird wire fences, shattering posts that had bled invisible lightning. A surge of infantry flooded forward, storming bunkers with wildfire bombs. Brief detonations flared, then fell silent as surviving crown soldiers fled inland, where avenues vanished under torrents from the broken cisterns. But victory remained distant. The crown host's rear lines, still vast, rallied in concentric squares around an elevated dais where standards of a crowned seven-pointed star mingled with a sigil unfamiliar to Aegon. A black tower encircling a white sphere. From that dais, trumpets screamed, and new banners unfurled, each bearing stylized wings framing a wheel of swords. The unified host had unveiled its reserve, and with it rolled the mightiest engines yet. Towering tripods lumbered forward, legs of articulated steel, each stride shaking shattered masonry free of walls. Atop each platform sat a gun barrel the length of a dromond, caged within rings of arcane inscriptions glowing blue. They pivoted as one, tracking the dragons overhead. Aegon's gut tightened. He sensed power coiled within those barrels, a power born perhaps of wildfire, perhaps the cold mathematics of archmaesters lost to time. He gestured sharply, signaling retreat to rally altitude. Balerion holds skyward, battered wings thundering. Vagar and Miraxes followed, bleeding but airborne. The three dragons circled beyond the zenith of the city's tallest tower, a silent council amid scarlet clouds. On the ground, the crown host consolidated, scarred but unbroken, its modern discipline steady as anvils. Fires raged unchecked, yet firefighting engines sprayed foaming chemicals that snuffed blazes where they threatened ammunition dumps. Supply convoys still threaded the grid, protected by flak wagons whose cannons belched munitions skyward. Aegon knew stalemate when he tasted it. They had stung the serpent's head but not severed it. To press now was to bleed dragons for scant gain, but to withdraw invited the host to regroup. And each hour granted them innovations he could ill predict. Somewhere in their forges men hammered out weapons purpose-built for dragon killing. He breathed, settling heart and mind. The conquest of old had not been won in a day. There had been Blackhaven, Maidenpool, the Field of Fire. Patience was a blade sharper than Blackfire. Below, the rain slowed, becoming a fine silver mist that cloaked corpses and craters alike. Smoke pillars thinned into ghostly serpents winding skyward. The moan of engines drifted on fitful wind, punctuated by distant crackle of flames licking ruined wards. Aegon lifted his sword high, letting broken daylight kindle along Valyrian glyphs. For a long, still moment, dragon and king hovered above the wounded city, like omen writ in void. Then he turned Balerion northward, toward the untouched fields of the Crownlands, where supply lines lay broad and vulnerable. One decisive strike at their grain and powder, and the modern army would starve within walls. Visenya and Rhaenys formed on his flanks. The battered host watched them depart, a hush falling over trench and boulevard as the dragon's silhouettes dwindled into cloud. Yet the war had only begun, and all men below, survivor and corpse alike, felt in their marrow the same tremor, the beating of distant wings returning soon, bearing fire older than kingdoms, and hungers older still. For in every age the dragons come again, and every age must answer their roar. The pale dawn that followed rose wan and ragged over a gutted horizon, shedding a colorless light across once green croplands, now churned to gray mud by tank treads and the wash of broken reservoirs. Above that desolate expanse, three dragons swept, vast shapes more shadow than flesh in the thinning mists, their wings beating a dirge to mark the kingdom's new age. Aegon rode Balerion at their center, the black dread scales still etched with frost scar and soot. Around them gulls wheeled, white flecks against the brooding bulk, crying in confusion at the smell of char and ash that suffused the morning air. Ahead lay the breadbasket of the Crownlands, a patchwork of grain silos, rail spurs, and power substations that fed the unified host. No high walls defended this hinterland. Instead, ranks of watchtowers bristling with antennae surveyed the fields. At each crossroad squatted concrete pillboxes, whose guns tracked the sky in lazy circles. Farther north, the silver serpent of the King's Highway shimmered, clogged with armored convoys rumbling toward King's Landing. Unaware that three fires of old Valyria glided overhead, Aegon signaled a tight spiral descent. Balerion angled his vast wings, and the other dragons followed, drifting into the pregnant stillness above a marshy swale. They settled in reeds tall as a man, the ground trembling under their weight. Steam plumed where dragonfire's lingering heat met cool waters, shrouding the beasts in a whitening veil. Aegon dismounted and strode toward a hastily erected pavilion where Rhys Baratheon waited with a cadre of mailed officers, some of the few who had survived the rush crossing with shields split and helms dented by bullets. Orys saluted with a fist across his breast. Scouts report armored trains every quarter hour, laden with munitions, he said, tracing lines on a rough parchment map weighted with stones. If we sever this rail spur here, their cannon will lack shells by nightfall. Aegon's gaze roved the crude sketch, noting Gordian tangles of track, pipes, and high-voltage lines. "What of these towers?" he asked, tapping a series of dots encircling the grain belt. "A net of observers and arcane antennae," Oris replied. "They speak to one another without ravens, signals that ride lightning itself. We saw them at Blackwater Bay. They guided the harbor batteries with uncanny speed." Visenya, helm beneath her arm, snorted. "Cut the head from that serpent first. No eye, no aim." Rhaenys lifted a finger. "And no voice. Their commanders rely on those signals for coordination. Blind them, and we turn disciplined machine to stumbling horde." "Nai, Toru." Aegon considered the terrain. Flat plains broken by irrigation ditches and the skeletal remains of orchards. Dragons could scorch towers, but to hold the ground afterward, men must advance. Men who would march beneath the baleful gaze of artillery, still massed to the south. "We will strike in 2 waves, he decided. Dragons at altitude, sowing fear and flame among the towers. Foot and horse behind, harrying retreating crews, planting wildfire charges along the rails. "Lady." No. He turned to a tall Myrish cell-sail, Raven of the Angel's Spear, who commanded a Mangonel brigade. "You will remain hidden here until signal. 3 green bursts. When towers fall, unleash stones and wildfire jars on any wagon road that remains intact." Ravon bowed, hawk nose dipping. "As the Dragon King wills." Visenya stepped to Aegon's side. "We must move before their sky eyes return. The aeroplanes will be aloft by full sun." Aegon nodded, his expression carved from granite. "To wings, then." They mounted once more. Valyrian's takeoff churned reeds into sodden vortices. Vagar and Merax's clawed sky, the roar of their ascent echoing across the flats. As they rose, sunlight broke the clouds in spears, gilding ragged wings with molten edge. Aegon kept their formation broad, presenting no single target for flak. Minutes later, the first tower came into view. A slender needle of steel and crystal, latticed in platforms where sentries manned swivel guns. Dishes of polished brass rotated atop its crown. Valyrian drew a deeper breath, but Aegon held fire. The roar of engines drifted from the highway, a convoy of ammunition lorries escorted by half-track flak wagons. "Perfect." He angled Valyrian in a stooping dive. Wind peeled tears from his eyes as the dragon's mast plunged. When they were scant heartbeats above the tower, Aegon spoke. "Dracarys." Cone of black-red flame blossomed, drowning tower, guns and men alike. Molten shards blast rippled outward, sieving the lead lorry clean in 2. Explosives within the truck cooked off, ripping a hole in the highway wide enough to swallow pursuing wagons. Smoke climbed in greasy spirals. To the west, Vagar breathed emerald-flecked fire across a cluster of satellite dishes, glass splintering in incandescent hail. Merax's seared a switching yard crowded with coal tenders. Locomotives screamed steam as boilers ruptured. Rails curled like ribbon. The grain belt's arteries spasmed in a single cascading convulsion that rolled mile upon mile. But the unified host did not sleep. Sirens erupted from hidden bunkers. Within minutes, trails of charcoal smoke streaked the sky. Surface-to-air rockets, the maesters called them. Guided by unseen runes, they curved toward the dragons with keening cries. Valyrian banked sharply. 2 rockets passed beneath, detonating in proximity. The blast slapped Aegon's backplate, ringing ears. A third clipped the trailing edge of Merax's starboard wing. Rhaenys reeled but retained control. On the ground, pillbox hatches split open, disgorging infantry in slate-gray uniforms, stitched with the winged wheel sigil. They brandished oddly slender spears that spat blue bolts. The energy crackled across dragon scales like summer lightning, stinging but superficial. It was the larger threats, the airships and heavy rockets, that would draw blood. Aegon barked orders through the speaking trumpet fixed to his saddle. Trumpet calls from Vagar and Meraxes answered, and 3 dragons ascended again, drawing the rocket fire upward, away from the advancing infantry. Below, Baratheon's shield wall surged from hidden depressions, smashing into the stunned defenders clustered around base camps. Wildfire grenades arced in green streaks. Where they burst, modern uniforms became torches. Yet, pockets of resistance solidified. At a rail junction near the Weeping Willow Canal, a company of host troopers rallied behind a pair of mobile gun platforms. Rhino-shaped half-tracks sporting twin heavy barrels. Their crews unleashed a hail of high-velocity shells that disintegrated a full cohort of Targaryen pikemen before Orys could angle shields to deflect. The king's cousin roared curses, calling cavalry to flank, but the marshy ground bogged horses. It was dragons or nothing. Aegon wheeled Balerion, ready to end the stalemate. But Visenya spoke through her warhorn. "Let them stand. I have an arrow for that beast." She flew Vagar to altitude and drew a strange weapon, half bow, half scorpion, crafted overnight by Kuhoric smiths. Its bolt was tipped with fused dragonglass and wildfire crystal. Vagar steadied in hover as Visenya loosed. The bolt streaked like a comet, embedding in the half-track's forward magazine. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the fusion of chemicals and jet fuel ignited. The explosion birthed a violet column taller than the Tower of the Hand, pulverizing platform and crew. Shockwaves rippled across the canal, toppling a stone viaduct and hurling defenders into the drain. Augmented by chaos, Aegon's ground troops pressed on. Sappers set plunger charges along the main rail spine. Within moments, tracks buckled, ties erupting. Grain silos, monoliths of steel, became blooming candles under arching wildfire pots. Flour dust mingled with ember, yielding rolling fireballs that roared skyward like newborn dragons. The smell of scorched wheat drifted for leagues. Still, resistance stiffened. From the north poured armored reinforcements. 12-wheel colossi with turrets braced by rune-inscribed plating. They cut across irrigation fields, cannons slamming shells at writhing clusters of Targaryen foot. One direct hit vaporized 200 men, shield wall and all. Aegon's teeth clenched. He had no wish to squander loyal flesh on needless attrition. "Harpoon!" he called to Rhaenys, invoking their coded maneuver. Meraxes arrowed down behind the lead colossus, jaws opening wide. Instead of flame, a gout of scalding steam erupted, drawn from her own boiling blood. The Vicar clouded optics, fogging viewports. Balerion swooped behind, claws extended, and physically flipped the blinded machine onto its back. The tank's turret split like a crab shell, ammunition cooked off in a thunderclap. The second colossus responded with speed unnatural for its bulk, pivoting to bring a secondary plasma cannon online. The beam it spat lanced the sky, clipping Vagar's tail. Chunks of seared flesh rained into a flooded patty. Vagar bellowed fury, wings beating enough sand to smother the beam. Visenya drew a second scorpion bolt. She aimed for the cannon's emitter array. Not the barrel, but the crystalline nodes that regulated its energies. The bolt shattered 2 nodes. The beam flickered, destabilized, then imploded inward, collapsing the cannon in a whirling star of molten slag. The tank's mystic capacitors overloaded. Azure lightning danced across hull rivets. Moments later, the fusion core breached in a silent flash that sucked air into itself before detonating in concentric rings of raw force. The shock dogged Meraxes sideways like a leaf in hurricane gust. For 30 heartbeats, a hush swelled. A distant bell tolled from some unseen steeple, its notes swallowed by the settling dust. The plains, once orderly grids, now smoldered in broken geometry. Twisted rails jutting skyward, silos reduced to black ribs, towers melted into stunted trees of slag. Streams of coolant and diesel intermingled with runnels of blood. Aegon guided Balerion to a low hover above Aurys' forward banner. The troops below looked up, faces streaked in soot and wonder. "Secure prisoners," he shouted through the trumpet, voice booming unnatural loud thanks to Myrish amplifiers. "Interrogate engineers. We must learn how their new guns speak." Even as he issued orders, a low thrumming reached his ears, at first like a swarm of bees, then building to a thunder of drumming wings. Aeroplanes dying. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Formations of silver specks crested the northern clouds, sunlight glinting off aluminum fuselages. The dragons had drawn first blood. Now the host answered. Rhaenys cursed softly. Merax's wielder interposed between the planes and the vulnerable ground crews. Balerion and Vhagar rose alongside, presenting a wall of scale and fury. But the aeroplanes did not dive. Instead, they maintained altitude, engines synchronized, releasing contrails that formed a lattice overhead. Glittering specks fell from their bellies. Parachutes, but no men dangled beneath. Instead fell metallic pods. At a predetermined altitude, each pod blossomed into a dark umbrella, streaking down on what looked like thin cables connected to the plane above. "Snares," Visenya growled. "They would cage us." Indeed, as pods fell, their cables tightened, forming web walls of flexible mesh laced with sparking gelignite nodes. If a dragon struck the net, the gelignite would detonate, shredding wing membranes. Aegon realized the lattice sought to pen them, buying time for ground gunners to reposition. "Climb," he ordered, but the net spanned horizon. Altitude would only draw them into a ceiling of cables. Balerion snarled, incensed. Fire roared from his throat, incinerating a swath of mesh. Rhaenys veered, seeking escape to southwest, but Merax's right wing clipped a cable and a blister of gelignite exploded. The wing membrane tore along a ragged gash. Blood misted. The dragon faltered, losing lift. Desperate, Merax's twisted and found purchase upon a gutted silo. The structure collapsed under the weight, burying dragon and rider in a plume of grain dust and smoke. "Rhaenys!" Aegon's cry tore from his throat. But there was no time to dive. Aeroplanes banked into attack vectors, fixed forward cannons spitting tungsten shot. The sky became an angry hive, buzzing with tracer stings. Balerion rolled, shielding Aegon with his great dorsal plates. Vhagar matched, spitting concentric arcs of flame that forced 3 planes to peel away trailing smoke. But more came. The net tightened. Below, Aurys saw the trap. He turned to his horn carrier. "Sound the war threnody," he commanded, voice hoarse from dust. The horn's deep note reverberated across the plains. In answer, ballista crews wheeled their largest torsion engines, massive double-limbed catapults retrofitted with crank-mounted grappling hooks forged from starfall steel. They aimed not at the dragons but at the hovering mesh. With a thunderous snap, cables soared upward, tangling nets with heavier iron lines. Counterweights yanked pods off balance. Aeroplanes jolted as tension hammered their wings. Some pilots jettisoned loads to escape, leaving holes in the lattice. Others fought to sever grapples, only to stall and plummet, propellers windmilling. 2 collided mid-air, erupting in a blossom of fire whose petals rained metal shards. Through one ragged gap Balerion surged, wings hammering the air, Vhagar close behind. Aegon banked toward the silo wreckage. He found Merax's half buried, one wing pinned beneath cylindrical plates of corrugated steel. Rhaenys crawled along the dragon's neck, blood streaking her temple where a shard had grazed. The Conqueror's heart, so long tempered in dragon fire, clenched with fear he dared not name. He urged Balerion, into a hover mere feet above the debris. With a bellow, the black dread clamped his jaws around the silo's mangled framework and tore it free in screeching bursts of metal. Dust roiled as steel ribs lifted. Meraxes lurched upright, wounded but alive. "Fly, beloved," Aegon called to Rhaenys. She wiped blood from her brow, nodding. Meraxes flapped once, twice, freeing herself from dangling cables. A gout of crimson-orange fire raged across the ground where soldiers of the host to finish her. They scattered like ants, but peril had multiplied. Beyond the aeroplane net, dark specks climbed from the horizon. 2 rotor ski ships, dragons of steel, each bore dorsal missile racks. Their prows bristled with angled plates embossed with runes designed to warp flame. Gyrocopters, a Dornish engineer had labeled earlier sketches. They now came in platoons of 10, blades whipping the air. Aegon gathered his riders close atop a rising thermal. The battlefield sprawled beneath. Ruined rails, flaming silos, stuttering gunfire. All-rise banners advancing. Host shock troopers reforming. The war's thunder deepened as new engines joined. "We cannot break them in one day," Rhaenys whispered, voice raw yet resolute. "No," Aegon agreed, gaze sweeping the endless plain. "But we can teach them fear that outlasts day and night both." Visenya's lips curved. Another strike then, a memory etched upon their marrow. Kisai. Aegon pointed Blackfire toward the largest power substation, a fortress of transformers, reactors, and coolant towers feeding King's Landing's lifeblood. "There, cripple their heart. Without power, their forges go cold, their beacons dark." He locked eyes with each sister in turn. "One pass, all fire. Then we depart north to Dragonstone for rest and forge new iron of our own." They accepted without words. Dragons banked, wings catching the eastern wind. The gyrocopters, sensing intent, accelerated to intercept, launching rockets that traced spirals of white smoke. But the dragons had already stooped, plummeting with comet speed toward the substation's sprawl. Balerion hit first. Flame poured like a river from Hell's Gate, pooling incandescent over coolant ponds. Steam geysers exploded, hurling 50-foot jets that shattered ceramic insulators. Arc towers blossomed into lightning flowers. Each petal licked sky with tongues bright enough to eclipse the sun for an instant. Valgar followed, trailing a ribbon of dusk purple fire that fused sand to black glass. Meraxes completed the triad, her roar shredding earthen embankments, so that torrents of superheated water cascaded onto electrical relays. Temperature differentials cracked steel casings. Transformers ruptured with thunderclaps that rolled across leagues. The world went dark. From distant King's Landing to the trenches at the Rush, lights winked out, machinery stuttered, screens flickered dead. Even the aeroplanes overhead lost stabilizer input. Some entered fatal spins as guidance systems failed. The gyrocopter's rotor servos seized, and 4 dropped like stones, disappearing in silent clouds of dust. A roaring cheer rose from Targaryen soldiers who watched the enemy's lightning snuffed like candles. But Aegon knew the scatter of victory. It glimmered, enticing, before slipping into shadow. Even now, host engineers would scramble to reroute circuits, restore auxiliary power. They needed time he must deny them. "Withdraw!" he cried across the trumpet. Dragon wings heated, banking north beyond shattered lattices. Aeroplanes gave fitful chase, but soon abandoned pursuit when fuel gouges blinked red and radios hissed impotent static. By the time the enemy regained power from backup generators, hours later, the sky was empty of fire, leaving only drifting ashes and the memory of wings. Night claimed the fields, a moonless, starless shroud as thick smoke veiled the heavens. Mid smoking craters Oris Baratheon mustered wounded and able alike. His voice, loud yet ragged, echoed through camps, lit by guttering torches. No electric floodlights now. Prisoners knelt bound with wire, cowed by wildfire's emerald glow. Among them engineers trembled at the silent menace of scaly silhouettes, perched on distant ridges. Oris approached one particularly gaunt man, in an oil-black uniform heavy with insignia. "You built those beam cannons," Oris accused. The engineer swallowed. Sweat cut pale streaks through the soot on his cheeks. "I oversaw the arrays. I am but one of many." Oris drew a dagger, Valyrian steel with a stag's head pommel. "Show me their weakness." The man's eyes flicked to the dagger's rippled blade, then skyward where Balerion rested like a mountain. "Coolant. They require constant coolant flow. Overheat and the crystals fracture." Oris nodded. "What coolant?" "A mixture. Liquid nitrogen forged by arcane freeze vaults. Without power, the vaults cannot pump." The prisoner's lips trembled. "You have undone months of supply with a single strike." Oris smiled like winter's wolf. "Then they will learn scarcity." He turned, gesturing to scribes. "Record every valve, every vault. We starve their guns. None dearly libai idiluinen durka." Far above the darkened realm, 3 dragons streaked northward toward the glimmer of Blackwater Bay. Moonlight finally pierced the smoke, painting silver atop bruised clouds. Rhaenys dozed against Meraxi's warm neck, shallow breaths measured by the dragon's heartbeats. Visenya rode vigilant, scanning the shining river threads that spiderwebbed the crownlands. Aegon brooded in silence. Victory tasted of ashes, too many men dead, and still the host endured. Yet within that somber reflection flickered a new ember: respect. These modern folk wielded wonders to awe old Valyria itself, but they bled like all men and trembled before dragon flame. War would be longer than the conquest of old, fiercer, more uncertain. He would need cunning equal to Balerion's fury. He vowed to give it, and more. Dawn's first pale fingers lit the rim of the world as Dragonstone's jagged silhouette breached the horizon. Lava-black peaks rose, crowned by towers shaped like talons. Here ancient Valyrian forges slept beneath basalt crust. Aegon would wake them, forging armor for dragon and man both, weaving sorcery with steel to counter beams of light and nets of wire. For every machine the host birthed, he would answer with dragoncraft unchanged since time immemorial. Fire, blood, and the unbreakable will of House Targaryen. Behind them, in the charred plains, embers still smoldered. Within those coals, modern engineers scrambled, cursing the dragons, vowing revenge. They would rebuild their grids, devise new snares. They too bore cunning, and the dance would continue. But on this night the realm lay divided, one half cloaked in old fire's promise, the other in cold sparks of human ingenuity. Between them stretched a battleground not of years but of horizons, where each dawn might birth new terrors. And above it all, the dragons wheeled, their shadows cast across ages, their roars a covenant that kingdoms, no matter how modern, must reckon with the legend of flame. Aegon closed his eyes as Balerion banked toward the volcanic spires, feeling the heat of home rising to meet them. Tomorrow they would plot again, study captured schematics, debate maester theories of charge and lightning. They would mourn the dead and anoint the living. They would seal new oaths in blood and iron. But tonight he allowed himself one breath of respite, tasting salt sea air, hearing the wind whistle through titanic wings. Beneath the ache of burnt flesh and bent steel, he sensed the future. Uncertain, perilous, yet ablaze with possibility. For war was a crucible, and from its fires came empires reborn. The black dread roared, echoing across empty sea, a vow carved into stars. And so the night held its breath, waiting for the next clash of age and innovation, for the echo of Dracarys to once again paint the world in living flame. The volcanoes of Dragonstone seldom slept, but in the weeks that followed the raid upon the Crown Lands, they roused to a fury unseen since the Doom. Veins of molten rock pulsed beneath basalt caverns, while bellows driven by dragon flame fanned crucibles aglow with star-white heat. Within those cavernous forges, Aegon Targaryen labored beside smiths drawn from Quhor and Volantis, Astapor and the Shadowlands, masters of chain, plate, and secret alloy. Hammer songs rang day and night, echoed by the deeper rumble of subterranean worms, whose slumbering hearts lent warmth to every anvil. Black Balerion crouched on an outer crag, wings mantled to shield Visenya and Rhaenys as they presided over drills along the island's wind-swept ridges. Hundreds of spearmen braced pikes, tipped with fresh-forged Valyrium glass, a hybrid of rippled steel and obsidian that sparkled with flecks of sorcerous light. When the order to test came, the front ranks drove their pikes through slabs of salvaged tank armor, suspended from chains. Steel screamed, glass flashed, and the slabs split as if carved by saws of diamond dust. On another ridge, crossbowmen loosed quarrels whose heads carried minuscule phials of iced wildfire. The bolts punched through shields of modern composite, bursting on exit in blossoms of green that burned cold enough to crack stone. Yet the greatest marvel took form in the deepest forge shaft. Aegon called it Draconite, a laminate of Valyrian steel hammered thin, layered with scales shed from his own dragons, then quenched in pools of seawater laced with drop blood from Merax's wounded wing. The result was as light as boiled leather and harder than bright steel. Piece by piece, curved plates were riveted into barding that would sheath dragon throats, wing joints, and heart vaults without hindering flight. When the first set emerged, midnight black, glossy as onyx, Balerion lowered his titanic head, allowing armorers to fasten the plates beneath his jaw. They meshed so seamlessly, they appeared grown, not forged. Aegon, gaunt from sleepless toil, watched with a faint smile. "Now we meet their lightning with stone," he said, voice hoarse. Visenya ran a thumb across a rigid neck plate. "Stone that drinks thunder, if Maester Myraldra speaks true. She swears this alloy disperses the beam's heat along the ridges. No single scale will bear the brunt." Rhaenys, her brow still marred by a thin scar from the net ambush, rested a hand on Merax's mailed flank. "Let their gyrocopters swarm. We shall tear them from the sky like gulls." On the mainland, the unified crown host did not idle. Reeling from the loss of power, they retreated to a cordon stretching from Duskendale to Maidenpool, fortifying a defense line they named the Argent Bastion. Here, factory cities forged new weapons, beneath gantries of humming crystal. Chief among these labs rose the Argent Spire, a tower of mirror-bright alloy that climbed above the salt marshes. Within, alchemists in white coats conjured a hybrid of wilding chemistry and modern physics. Starfire rods, slender shells that, when ignited, birthed plasma vortices hot enough to rival dragon flame. Overseeing the bastion was Lady Marshal Carene Aarons, a commander of Brusque Manor and Iron Creed. She studied every reconnaissance slate, every intercepted raven, building a profile of her ancient adversary. In her war chamber maps, Aegon's face, not the stern visage of statues but a living map, loomed on a holoplate, eyes flickering each time she cycled data streams. Around that ghostly head spun readouts of Draconite composition, flight arcs, and probable fuel-to-flame ratios. She murmured to her adjutant, We bleed him by inches. No heroics. Attrition and denial. He feeds his beasts on fear. We starve them of it. 1. Nulch. To that end, she ordered nightly arrow saunters, small squadrons of silent prop rotorcraft, whose only mission was to haunt the skies above Dragonstone, dropping flares of white magnesium at random hours. The light never harmed dragons, but it robbed them of unbroken darkness and rest. Engine drones echoed through keep corridors, sowing sleepless unease among Targaryen ranks. Aegon answered in kind, while dragons slumbered, tail flicks betraying irritation. He dispatched stealth galleys crewed by Lycian corsairs to slip beneath harbor chains at Duskendale. These raiders carried no siege weapons, only barrels of slug leeches bred in the toxic pools of Sothorios. Released into freshwater reservoirs, the parasites bred at terrifying speed, choking filtration systems. Within a fortnight, garrison wells ran foul. Soldiers queued for rationed cistern water already laced with dysentery. The first deaths were quiet, feverish men buried in midnight trenches. But word reached Lady Karenai. She replied with punitive strikes on coastal hamlets suspected of harboring corsairs, burning villages with incendiary drones. Thus the war settled into a rhythm of wound and counterwound, each side probing for the artery that would bleed the other dry. The strike that broke stalemate began with a tempest. Barbed storm clouds rolled south from Witch Isle, bearing thunder so fierce that even dragons sought cavern refuge. On the eve of that storm, Maester Myroldra approached Aegon, her robes slick with forged sweat. She held a shard of mirrored crystal the size of a dagger. "Forgive my intrusion," she said, voice husky, "but the glass candles have shown me a path. The Argent Spire channels power drawn from lightning rods along the bastion. Tonight's storm will overcharge those rods, strike their conduits mid-surge, and the feedback may melt their starfire stores. No one dare see." Aegon weighed the shard in torchlight, seeing his reflection fractured into 100 eyes. "A plan drenched in hazard," he said at length, "but storms favor dragons." He summoned his war council. Visenya mapped the spire's perimeter on a slate of obsidian dusted with chalk, nested kill zones, bastion railguns, ballistic arc for starfire dispersal pods. Rhaenys outlined a pincer. Meraxes and a wing of wyvern riders would feint along the coastal escarpment, drawing anti-air fire. Meanwhile, Balerion and Vhagar would soar above the storm front, cloaked by cloud, then dive on the spire the instant a lightning bolt grounded. Timing would matter more than fury. Release flame early, and the discharge might ground through Draconite, reducing dragon and rider to char. Too late, and the spire's failsafes would vent excess energy harmlessly. They waited through an afternoon, heavy as molten lead. Distant thunder rumbled like the advance of titans. By dusk, flashes strobed across the horizon, revealing the jagged teeth of the bastion's walls. On that signal, the Targaryen host launched, ground columns and skiff boats, wyvern scouts hugging cliff shadows, and 2 armored dragons climbing into boiling skies. At first, the storm engulfed them so utterly that even dragonfire seemed feeble. Flashes lost in greater flashes. Rain hammered scale like arrows. Updrafts pitched Vhagar 80 feet in a heartbeat, nearly unseating Visenya. But Balerion thrived. Thunder vibrated deep in his chest as if echoing his own roar. Aegon leaned low, whispering Valyrian phrases older than Summerhall ruins. Without command, the black dread angled toward the tallest stack of clouds where lightning nested like vipers. Below, the Argent Spire's metal rods glowed faintly violet, preparing to channel the storm. Inside its war hub, Lady Karenai paced, boots ringing on durasteel grates. Readings scrolled across hololith screens, static charge, microflux variances, wind shear prediction. When sensors flagged thermal signatures, dozens of smaller flyers along the coast, she ordered starfire batteries to ready. Her mind, sharp as obsidian, recognized the feint. "Wait," she told gunnery chiefs. "Hold until primary contacts reveal." She suspected dragons lurked above, hidden by cloud mass, yet even suspicion could not conjure their exact vector. She needed the storm's glare to silhouette them. Rhaenys made her move first. Meraxes broke cloud cover at dune height, skimming wave tops and vomiting gouts of purple flame across bastion trenchworks. Spotlights lanced after her, but raindrops refracted beams into lurching hollows. As coastal guns pivoted, wyvern riders darted overhead, dropping ceramic eggs of black smoke that blossomed into choking miasma. In that confusion, ground troops charged the outer wire, brandishing dragonglass pikes. Mines rippled, but they fed fresh furrows rather than stall the assault. Deluge turned soil to slurry, muffling blasts beneath watermark mud. The defenders began to return fire, and their tracers painted erratic arcs through sheets of rain. Several wyverns tumbled in flames, their riders plunging into surf, yet every eye on those parapets focused seaward, failing to notice the dark leviathan descending from the zenith of the storm. A lightning stroke shattered the cloud stack at the exact instant Balerion folded wings. White fire spider webbed along the spire's rods, illuminating the bastion like noon. Resonant thunder pummeled chests. Sensors within the tower screamed overload warnings, but fail-safe shutters were still sliding into place when the dragon struck. Vhagar hit first, plummeting like a meteor. Her armored brow smashed the western lightning rod, snapping it thrice. Molten shards rained across turbine housings. At the same breath, she exhaled a tight beam of dragon flame, a learned trick, honed through ingesting alchemist salts, directly into the open conduit mouth. Superheated plasma surged downward, meeting a column of rising, ionized air. The resultant feedback detonated in a purple sphere that expanded faster than thought. Vhagar herself vanished inside it for a heartbeat. When she re-emerged, pieces of her new barding glowed white, but her scales remained uncharred. Balerion followed, jaws wide. Instead of a sustained breath, he spat 3 discrete gouts, timed like hammer blows, one to melt the northern rod, one to fuse coolant vents, one to shatter the crystal data spine at the tower's core. Black fire in Aegon's fist amplified each roar, its runes catching stray discharge and redirecting arcs back into metal ribs. Sparks cascaded around them. The sky's own blood. Inside the war hub, consoles erupted, frying crew where they stood. Lady Karenai shielded her face as starfire rods stacked in the storage cradle overheated. She bellowed for evacuation, but half her officers lay twitching amid ruptured capacitors. She grabbed a data shard, a sliver containing every analysis of Draconite, and fled down emergency stairs even as the upper decks flowered into flame. Outside, sirens wailed. Targaryen ground troops, already in retreat posture, watched the spire's apex pulse brighter and brighter, like a beating heart starved of skin. They backed down flooded trenches, shouting warnings to allies and foes alike. Rain intensified, but steam from molten alloy outmatched the deluge, birthing fog wick-thick. Then the argent spire exploded. No eye saw the instant of detonation. Only a blinding pall, white as a nova, swallowed everything. The concussion flattened men and dragon alike. Shockwaves propagated in concentric rings, peeling turf from bedrock and flensing concrete bastions from steel skeletons. Shards of reflective metal, some longer than spears, erst into the sky, glimmered, and fell like lethal hail far beyond the original perimeter. Where a fragment struck Merax's injured wing, the newly forged barding deflected most of the kinetic force. Still the dragon cried, pain echoing across valleys. Wavefront met the coastal shelf, parted water for half a mile, and returned as a tsunami that swallowed supply piers and Eurocopter hangars wholesale. Fire married water. Pillars of steam climbed 10,000 feet before cold air condensed them into torrential downpour that hammered the land anew. When senses returned to those still breathing, A crater yawned where the spire had stood, a molten bowl rimmed by slag cliffs glowing dull red. Lightning still cracked overhead but found no rods to embrace. Instead it stabbed randomly into soaked earth, raising gouts of hissing mist. Aegon lay dazed in Balerian's saddle. His ears rang with silence so profound it drowned even thought. Only slowly did sound bleed back. The drip of rain on plate, a distant roar of waves, the stuttering clank of fractured gears within bastion guns. He opened his eyes to see Visenya circling overhead, searching. He raised black fire in feeble salute. She angled toward him, relief etched deep. Together they landed near the lip of the new lake of fire. Rhaenys arrived moments later, leading ground detachments, carrying wounded on makeshift litters. Sight of Aegon roused cheers from throats raw with ash. Yet triumph sat uneasy on them. Casualties littered the flats. Men scorched by plasma surge. Wyvern corpses tangled in razor wire. Host soldiers charred where they had stood at posts. Aegon dismounted, legs unsteady. He strode to the crater's edge. Lava burbled below, occasionally burping rogue vortices of starfire that spiraled upward like serpents seeking sky. The Argent Bastion, keystone of the host's northern defense, was gone. Supply chains would tangle, batteries would starve for power. But the scale of ruin staggered even the Conqueror. Visenya joined him, helm tucked beneath her arm. Water ran in streams through her singed hair. A single blow, she murmured. Yet still not the war's end. No, Aegon agreed. But we have broken their spine. Now we break their limbs. Nibidi, one, Bailey, Wazi. Lady Marshal, Karenai, Aaron survived, though badly burned down her left flank where a streamer of superheated steam had caressed flesh. She crawled through mangled service tunnels, emerged onto a rain-slick field strewn with glowing debris, and was dragged into a medic shelter by sergeants who scarcely recognized their commander beneath soot and blood. There, amid makeshift triage, she received reports through sputtering comlinks. The spire destroyed, starfire reserves lost, 90% of high-order leadership dead or missing. She listened, jaw clenched, and at last spoke into a cracked mic. Initiate protocol Basilisk. Deep within distant vaults, sealed algorithms unlocked. Production lines pivoted from starfire to darker arts. Blood-coated viruses designed to target draconic genomes. Warheads laced with sound frequencies tuned to shatter dragon marrow. Submersible hunter vessels with harpoons tipped in poison wrought from Shadowbinder's lore. What the dragons had done tonight demanded retribution, no less fearsome. Aegon sensed this shift days later, though not by raven or spy, but by shiver along Balerian's spine while they patrolled the charred coast. The black dread, usually impassive, turned restless, nostrils flaring at scents born on offshore wines. Scents of oil, brine, and something older. Blood magic refined by modern craft. Aegon recalled stories from Valyria's last years, when even dragon lords fell to chimeric plagues brewed in desperation. He gathered his captains beneath Dragonstone's basalt vault, shared his fears, and ordered immediate reconnaissance of every coastal inlet. Visenya volunteered to lead a strike-fast wing of wyvern scouts. Rhaenys, still nursing Mirax's wing, remained to oversee forge production of anti-sonic sigils, small brass chimes tuned to disrupt resonance weapons. Master Myraldra consulted with shadowbinders from Ashai, tracing sigil lines across sheets of hammered gold meant to line dragon throats. In the nights that followed, Dragonstone flickered with foxfire glow as wards were etched, blood ink sealed, and chants spoken in tongues lost with old Valyria. The mountain shook. Some said in protest at such arts, others in approval. Visenya's flight uncovered Basilisk at the mouth of Massey's Hook, a submarine pen hewn into cliffside, concealed behind mimic rock gates. Through night vision crystals they spied long, sleek shapes half-submerged along piers, torpedoes large enough to house men, sigils in Stranger runes lined their casings. At each prow gleamed vials of viscous black, swirling like ink alive. Visenya scouts marked patrol routes, flak nests, and sonic beacons guarding the cove. They returned in silence, carving notes onto scarlet parchment, for human speech felt almost treasonous while such weapons stirred below. When they delivered intelligence to Aegon, his jaw tightened until knuckles whitened around Blackfire's hilt. "They mean to hunt us in our own element," he said. Rhaenys touched her scar. "Then we dive first." Aegon's gaze shifted to Maester Myraldra. "How fares the Orichalcum diver?" The Maester smiled, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "Ready, my king." A suit for one rider, shaped of dragonbone struts and glamored glass, tethered to air bladders furnished by Balerion's own breath. "It will bear you half a league beneath the tides." "No twice." Visenya frowned. "Too great a risk. Send cell sails with blast kegs." "No," Aegon said. "Their poisons may rupture if struck. We must sever guidance crystals, not detonate them." The council argued deep into morning, but in the end, the conquerors withstood. The night of the dive unfurled under a waning moon. Balerion ferried Aegon across choppy seas, wings skimming whitecaps. At the Hook's Crag, he set the dragon down behind a spire of rock shrouded in storm spray. Armorers clamped the diver suit around the king, bronze ribs over draconite mail, glass helm etched with runes of breathing. Tubes fed to buoy sacks inflated by Balerion's heated lungs, ensuring gas warm and rich. Aegon tested flex of shoulder, rotation of wrist, then shouldered a harpoon gun whose shaft carried a quarrel of fused Valyrium and mirror crystal. Visenya waited with Vagar aloft, ready to descend if alarms rang. Rhaenys guarded the surface approach with a wing of wyverns. At Aegon's nod, sappers placed smoke flares along cliff edges, igniting a screen of gray to hide silhouettes from clifftop searchlights. Then Aegon stepped off rock into swirling sea. Salt closed overhead, cold as iron. Down he sank through columns of bubbles, the suit's runes emitting faint luminescence. Fish fled. Deeper still, blackness swallowed all but the thin lantern at his chest. He kicked, guiding descent along a rope anchor, lowered earlier. The tether vibrated in erratic pulses, signals from Visenya above, counting the seconds until the castle fell to ruin if he failed. At 200 feet, faint green glows appeared, the torpedoes, lined in rows like slumbering leviathans. Dock lamps bathed them in sickly hue. Dived-in slate armor glided between hulls. Some bore wands crackling with blue arcs, welding fins. Others inspected vials of black ichor, checking runic seals. Aegon drifted beneath catwalks, careful not to let his bubbles breach surface. He hoisted the harpoon gun, sighting on the foremost vial cluster. He squeezed. The quarrel shot forward, trailing Silva. It punched the glass cradle and exploded in cold flash. Mirror fragments slicing runes, Valyrian shard disrupting containment glyphs. The black ichor vomited into seawater, spreading like ink and dissolving, inert outside glyph matrix. Sirens blared. Divers wheeled beams from helmet lamps, scouring gloom. Aegon propelled upward, planting boots on hull plating. He fired again, severing a guidance mast. Lights flickered. Torpedo clamps released inadvertently, sending one cylinder drifting downward into abyss. Above, spotlight cones stabbed sea. Depth charges tumbled, detonating in blossoming spheres that hammered the diver's suit. Ribs groaned. Aegon's ears bled. He slammed a hand to the helm's rune, invoking the word carved inside. "Zobrak, shield!" Translucent sphere burgeoned, dispersing shockwaves into ripples. But air dwindled, Balerion's heat cooled. He must ascend. He fired one last quarrel, this at a steel support, strut securing the rack of remaining torpedoes. The quarrel's rune flared violet, metal corroded in an eye blink. 2 torpedoes snapped free, colliding and scraping, runes sparking. Without guidance, they drifted into each other, fracturing vials. Ink clouds erupted. Alarms escalated into panicked shrieks. Aegon kicked upward through chaos, lungs burning. The rope anchor guided him, but a searchlight found his silhouette. Harpoon lines shot down. A diver guard's weapon, one-pronged grapple, caught his leg, puncturing draconite plate. Pain lanced. He slashed with belt dagger, severing cord. He climbed. On the surface, Visenya saw bubbles royal black. Her depth charges boom. She spurred Vygarn to dive, roaring defiance. Gyrocopter sentries broke formation to target her. Wyverns fell upon them, talons ripping rotor blades. In that distraction, Aegon's helm breached air, coughing brine. Rhaenys swooped low, claws extended, lifting him bodily from sea before machine guns could rake water. Moments later, shockwaves from the pen reverberated. The cliff face cracked as ink-flooded torpedoes reacted violently with salt and ruined. Cords of green-black flame belched from the cave mouth. Stone collapsed, sealing the pen beneath thousands of tons of rubble. The Basilisk project sank to watery tomb. Days later, Ravens delivered intercepts. Unified command in disarray. Lady Karenni presumed dead, her last act an unauthenticated protocol trigger. Yet Aegon placed no faith in such rumors. He tended his wounds in Dragonstone's maester towers, legs stitched, lungs raw. But each sunrise he climbed the Sea Dragon Tower to stare across horizon, watching for shapes of steel dragons returning. They did not. Instead, on the 3rd dawn after Basilisk, a lone arrow messenger sputtered above Dragonstone under flag of truce. It carried a crystal cylinder addressed to the Tyrant of Flame. Within, a hologram played. Lady Karenni alive, face scarred, eye bandaged, but resolve harder than forged titanium. Her recorded words poured into the tower chamber. Fire conquers quickly, but embers smolder long after the blaze. You have turned our cities to crucibles and slain thousands. Yet every life lost is seed for vengeance. We will scour the archives, unearth every nightmare buried by wiser ages. For each dragon born to you, we shall birth 10 engines. Our resolve is steel. Yours is frail, flesh-riding, scaled beasts. Flee across the narrow sea, and you may live out your days in legend. Remain, and we will carve your epitaph on the bones of your monsters. Notice. Aegon listened, expression unreadable. When tape ended, he crushed the crystal until shards bled his palm. Visenya fetched bandage. Rhaenys watched, dark eyes reflecting twin fires. Her words sting, because they ring of us, Visenya said softly. We too once vowed such oaths against the free cities. A silence stretched, broken only by far-off crash of surf. At length, Aegon spoke. I will not flee, yet neither shall I wage war alone, with dragons and swords, while they wield the knowledge of 1,000 generations. We must bind the realm. We call banners of houses proud and humbled both. We teach them to forge draconite, to ride wyverns, to chant runes. We make of Westeros a single anvil against which their engines break. Learn. Tao. Rhaenys laid a hand on his uninjured arm. Some houses remember Harrenhal. They fear fire more than they hate machines. Then we give them choice, Aegon replied, voice iron. Kneel and share the flame. Stand and feel it. Now, Shazels. Ravens flew to Winterfell, to Sunspear, to Highgarden and Pike. Some lords scoffed, others trembled. The first to answer was Lyanna Stark's great-great-grandson, Lord Joran of Winterfell, who arrived on a charcoal direwolf larger than any horse. He brought news that the host lured giants of the frozen shore with promises of warm lands, ripe for plunder, forging an ice spear-tip force to flank the dragons. He swore the north would not be used so. His direwolf, graying, scar-riddled, bowed before Balerion without fear. On that ice-salted wind, Aegon smelled new allegiance and possibilities. Direwolf packs running beneath Draconite armored wings, northern smiths soaking forges with white cedar and weirwood charcoal. From the Reach came red wine ships laden with barrels of golden wine and sacks of black powder, rumored thrice the potency of crown host charges, a gift of both tribute and warning. Highgarden's Lady Laurel Tyrell offered horticultural secrets, hybrid vines whose sap, when distilled, could numb dragon pain and speed scale regrowth. She asked in turn for Draconite scraps to weave into light cuirasses for her archer-made companies. Across months, Dragonstone transformed into a court of embers, where ancient great houses mingled with cell-sails, shadowbinders, and exiled maesters. Alliances forged beneath looming wings, sealed with cups of wildfire-laced wine and kisses beneath molten lava falls. Songs of New Age seeded taverns from Gulltown to Old Town. Ballads of dragons that warred with thunder rods and glass nets. Children played at being Marshal Caranai, brandishing sticks while other children roared like Balerion and knocked them down. Yet distant storms brewed. Merchant skiffs whispered of factories in Ashford churning out resonance horns tall as mountains, of plague ships docking at lists bearing holds of anti-dragon pathogens, of maesters drafting treatises on Draconite's weaknesses, claims that repeated quenching might induce brittle fractures. With each rumor, Aegon's brow darkened. War, once a matter of spears and fields, had sprawled across sea lanes, trade routes, even whispered thought. One crisp morning, as dawn brushed Dragonstow's cliffs in rows, he stroked Blackfire's blade, a melancholy air about him. "I dreamed," he said without turning, "of Valyria the night before the doom. They feasted and sang, believing themselves eternal. Then fire beneath earth consumed them. Am I any wiser?" Visenya rested her chin on his shoulder, gaze following gulls that circled far below. "You carry doubt, brother, as any king must, but you also carry flame no tide may quench. You led us through field of fire and black water. You'll lead us through thunder and blood machines. The doom came to Valyria from within. Ours peers at us from without. We will stand together or fall none wiser. Nemesis." He turned, pressing brow to hers. "Together then, dragons and direwolves, roses and krakens, every banner that will fly. We forge a future, neither ancient nor modern, but ours." They parted as horns called practice musters. Dragons rose from pits, Draconite glinting crimson. On beaches, northern shield maidens drilled with pike staffs, while maesters tested starfire turned fertilizer on burned fields, coaxing life where ash had ruled. Overhead, a wyvern courier spiraled down, bearing urgent sigils from Queen's Landing, reports of new host activity near the ruined spire, massive ferrocrete pillars rising, each capped with a sphere reflecting dawn like shards of shattered moons. Aegon read, eyes narrowing. "They build again," he murmured. "A lattice of celestial lenses to focus sun into beams beyond even starfire." Visenya clenched gauntlet. "Then we strike Erita lines." Rhaenys joined them. Mirax is at her back wearing full barding of shimmering silver. "The banners stand ready, my love. Wolves, roses, krakens, and lions alike." Aegon inhaled sea air heavy with brimstone and salt. "Then the dance resumes," he said. Dragons roared, echoing down jagged corridors of time, heralding a new act in a war older than history. Flame versus lightning, legend against progress, the heartbeat of beasts beneath scale against the cold click of engines. The world beyond trembled, caught between nightmares of past and future. And above it all, 3 silhouettes wheeled beneath rising sun. One black as midnight, one copper and scarred, one silver white with new-grown scale shining like dawn, pointing their shadows toward fate yet unwritten, ready to etch fresh lines of fire across